Let's get started. I'm Kara Warren,
And I am Christy Regan.
and we are the co-founders of Flow. We're going to tell you a little bit more about us later, but for right now, we would like to introduce you to Leslie Johnson. He is the managing broker with Side Inc., and he is responsible for the states of Georgia and South Carolina. And Side is the #1 brokerage platform for top agents. Leslie is a 25 plus year real estate industry expert, and he's also a real estate lawyer, which makes him an absolute expert on this topic. Welcome, Leslie. We're so excited to host you today.
I'm very excited to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So the three of us were talking last week about Sitzer Burnett commission lawsuit, which had a $1.8 billion verdict. And there's also additional lawsuits that have been filed, and those all centered around NAR's participation rule and the practice of agent commission sharing. And you had shared some incredible insights with Christy and me, and we thought, it would be a great opportunity to bring you in today. So we're so grateful that you've agreed to share those insights with our audience.
My pleasure.
Awesome. For the audience, we've got a lot to cover today, and we saved some time at the end for Q&A. So feel free to pop your questions in the chat. We'll monitor those throughout the event and pick a few popular ones to ask Leslie. Okay, Leslie, shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Christy, do you want to kick off our Q&A?
Absolutely. So, Leslie, as we were talking last week, for those of us that are not quite as involved in the real estate industry, you did a really good job breaking it down kind of in plain English for myself and for Kara. And if you can just expand a little bit on that, where are we today with the lawsuit?
Sure. Well, it's lawsuits, plural, and more every day. But the big one that everyone's paying attention to right now is the Sitzer Burnett lawsuit. And the reason because that actually went to trial and now has a jury verdict. So this is a federal class action suit that represents approximately 500,000 Missouri homeowners. It's alleging unfair trade practices that are in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And it's alleged that the National Association of Realtors and Home Services of America, which is huge, and Keller Williams, also huge brokerages, that they colluded to inflate the seller's cost of selling a home by requiring a certain commission rate that had to be shared, paid by the seller, that had to be shared with the buyer's agent. The allegation is that this largely happened through NAR's clear cooperation policy and also filtered down to the MLS rules. Most MLSs are owned by a realtor association, which is affiliated with NAR. So again, the defendants here were National Association of Realtors and two major brokers. The reason it's getting so much play right now is because a jury verdict was rendered. The jury found that the defendants were liable for violating the Antitrust Act, and the jury also concluded that the damages caused to these 500,000 or so Missouri homeowners was $1.8 billion. Now, in an antitrust lawsuit, the damages there can be treble damages, meaning that the judge has the ability to actually raise the judgment against these three defendants up to $5.4 billion. That's a lot of money. And in a class action, you can also often have your attorney's fees, the plaintiff's attorney's fees can be paid by the defendant as well. So we're looking at quite a substantial possible judgment. Now, even though the jury's verdict is in, the trial court portion of this is still not quite over because the judge still has to issue an order. The jury is the finder of fact. Like, did they in fact break this law? And then what were the damages to the owners? But the judge has to then take that and then apply the law to see what the actual final order will be. So the judge is going to issue an order about the damages amount, how much they will have to pay in damages, and whether or not there will be an injunction. An injunction is where a court says you must do something or you must not do something. What we're expecting, there's all kinds of people talking about this, but the injunctive relief if it's on the weekend, not the weekend, but if it is a weak injunction, not weak, but not so bad, then it could just say that you can have no more mandatory commission sharing. In other words, you can't say to a seller, in order to list your property in MLS, you have to contribute 6% to commission or whatever the number is. And we must share half of that with the buyer's agent, because that's how we've gotten buyer's agents paid for a long time. That's the question. Can we kind of put that in bake that in on the front end? So they may just say you can't have mandatory commission payments or mandatory commission sharing. A harsher or more stringent version would be no more commission sharing, period. So that would be the seller pays whatever the listing agent is going to make, and then the buyer must pay their agent, the buyer's agent. And this injunction could go into effect immediately, or the judge could issue an injunction and say, but we're not going to put it into effect. It's called a stay. And the reason is because we know this is going to be appealed. NAR has vowed to appeal the verdict, and this will take years to get all the way through the process. So the argument for a stay is that it will have substantial implications for our industry, and it will impact the consumer. So perhaps we want to go ahead and see if there are any other legal issues that are going to be, it could be reversed completely. Do we want to make these changes before it happens? Right along with Stitzer, there was the Morrill and Gibson. And in Gibson, they actually have the same judge and the same plaintiff's lawyer. These are right behind this one. Those are also both class action, same issues, just much bigger numbers. In the case of Morrill, it's a little bit different because it's the seller who's suing. In the other two, Gibson and Barnett, it was the buyers who sued. So this is nowhere near over. However, the verdict has already instigated a lot of copycat lawsuits, and they are proliferating. Another big one was filed in Texas. I think it was on Tuesday of this week. Several of the large national brokerages have gone ahead and settled in some of these other lawsuits as well as Barnett. And these settlements could very likely have an impact on how our industry moves forward, because these are such big firms. It will potentially change the industry. Mm-hmm. So that's where we are.
Wow. Up to $5 billion. That's incredible. Can you tell us a little bit more about the impact that's going to, happen with realtors?
Well, the 5 stages of grief. You've heard that. Mm-hmm. I've been observing the 5 stages of realtors hearing the verdict. Would you like to hear what I think they are?
Absolutely.
Number 1 is panic. And that's driven largely by news, because the news, this is a big change. It's a bombshell. So the news has been playing this up, and the world's going to end, and what's going to happen, and we'll all have to live under a bridge. You know how it is. So panic struck. Then the next phase of grief for agents was obviously to turn it into social media content, because we're all looking for some, right? So we've had the social media phase. Now I think what I'm seeing is that agents are doubling down on what we were already doing, or supposed to be doing in many cases. And by that, I mean they're getting buyer brokerage agreements. They're having discussions about commission. And in many states, this is already either mandatory to some degree, not in all states, but I think in most cases, buyer agents were already discussing these things in anticipation, just in the conversation we've been having based on these lawsuits. The fourth stage is I'm seeing agents just kind of put this in the back of their mind and focus on their clients and their transactions because that's what we do. And they're just staying the course. And then the other thing I'm seeing agents do, my fifth stage, is they're preparing for change. Because we know it's probably coming. We don't know exactly what it looks like yet. But we are seeing people. So I'll give you a couple of examples of that. My company side had a Zoom meeting for open to all agents yesterday. We typically get 200, 300 across the country, you know, for one of these trainings. Yesterday we blew up Zoom. Didn't know we needed to do a webinar because within seconds of it opening, we had 500 people, which is the maximum, and there were 1,500 more trying to get in. So what that tells me is that agents are paying attention and they're watching and they're trying to learn what is coming and how do we get ready for it. I'll tell you another conversation I had earlier this week. All the Georgia agents side got together and they were saying the same thing. These are things we're already doing. They were very curious about it. I also had a conversation with an agent about a buyer client that she's been working with for years and years. I think maybe just two. The transaction blew up. I won't go into the details, but you know, it was a fun one. And so the ultimate result of this is that she's probably not going to get paid for all this work she's been doing for this buyer client. Well, my question to her after these conversations was, what if we were getting a retainer for all of our buyer clients? You know, who change their mind or just don't, you know, fizzle out.
Right.
What if we were charging hourly for all the work we're doing? I mean, these are some changes that could really, they could be really good. So it's not all bad. So what I'm seeing is increased use of buyer brokerage agreements. I mean, what's going to change? We will see people using buyer brokerage agreements and treating them like a listing agreement. When you go to get a listing, you know what you do. You present your skills, your resources, your knowledge. You're going to do the same thing as a buyer because you're going to have to show your value. In Georgia, we've had the Brokerage and Real Estate Transactions Act since 1994, and that prescribed that we should get these. In Washington State, they added buyer compensation to their forms, their purchase and sale agreement right on the front 2 years ago. So they have forced that to be a negotiation. So these are already happening. I think that most or all states will require them, and in any states that don't, the brokerage firms will require them. We're also seeing increased use. I think we will see, we aren't seeing it yet, but you asked me how it will change. I think that we'll see increased use of retainers, more fee-based. It'll be similar to lawyers in the way they bill, perhaps. This is not necessarily a novel idea, actually. We've had in Georgia, which is, you know, where I am, we've had in our buyer brokerage agreement the ability to get a retainer and to bill hourly or get a flat fee. We've had that for years in our Georgia Association of Realtors forms. It's just that nobody's really been using them because that wasn't what we typically did, but it's there to do, and I have seen it used. In New York, if you want to rent an apartment, you have to have a realtor to get you into these buildings, and you better be ready to plunk down $2,500 just for them to talk to you. So these things are different than a lot of us have experienced, but they're not necessarily bad. And it really could make sense in light of the technology that buyers have now, because they can go online and they can see everything that's in the MLS. We used to be the gatekeepers. We used to be the only ones who knew what was up for sale, you know, without driving around looking for signs. That's not the case anymore, but we still add a ton of value. Not only just getting in the homes, but also, you know, navigating through the process, the vendors that we have, the inspectors, the, you know, repair people. So these are things that we do offer. What we will see is that in a particularly in the buyer realm, we'll have to show our value and our expertise. That will be key. So things like you have connections to maybe with other agents to find, and even just your own sphere to find off-market properties. And then, nowadays, in generations past, it was about having the stuff, having the big house, having the car, having the whatever stuff. Now it's about experiences. And so if we can give someone a really good home purchasing or home selling experience, but we're talking about buyers here, that's why people are using realtors now, particularly younger generations. So I don't see it. I see changes, but it's not a death knell.
Wonderful. That is incredibly interesting. And you touched on this a little bit, but do you want to dive in a little bit more on the impact to sellers and the impact to buyers?
Yes. I'm going to start out by saying, again, this is all about the value we offer to the buyers. And I'd like to start out by saying that the 2023 NAR profile of home buyers, where they survey people who just closed on a house, 89% used a real estate agent to represent them. And that was up from 86% in 2022. And I will say that millennials use agents more than any other generation ever has, even in the age of technology. So millennials, first of all, they're about the experience. And secondly, they already know our value. So we will still be here to offer guidance and representation for the buyers. Now, if the buyers have to come out of pocket to pay for this representation, which I think is probably unlikely, I think we'll somehow, and we can talk about this later, we'll have a way to make that part of the loan or, the overall transaction cost as it is now. I think that there will possibly be a negative impact to less affluent buyers and less sophisticated buyers who are probably the ones who need representation the most. I think that will be an unfortunate impact if that happens. Hopefully we can navigate this change in a way that won't happen. Maybe I think sellers think this is a payday. Like they think, oh, we're not going to have to pay all this commission anymore. Well, maybe, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get free money, because it doesn't change the value of your home, your property. And at the end of the day, what it takes to sell your house is what a buyer's willing to pay for it, and included in what they pay for it is what it takes to get through the transaction. So it's all just part of the transaction we have today, and it will continue to be part of the transaction. Whether that's, the buyer pays for it, which means it reduces their down payment, or maybe they roll it into their loan, essentially like it's basically happening now as value in the house. Maybe it will be the seller contributing additional closing costs, because the commissions or the payment, the representation cost that a buyer pays is a closing cost. So I think what's going to happen is, if you bought or sold a house and you've seen the settlement statement, there's all those numbers in 2 columns. I think some of the labels will change and some of those may shift around to other things. But at the end of the day, I think the bottom line is basically probably going to be the same.
Okay. And overall, the housing market, do you think there is going to be a large impact? Are buyers and sellers nervous about what is happening and all this buzz that they're hearing? What do you think is going to happen with the market?
Well, I think some things will happen, but it's already happening. So first of all, we've already seen across the country, MLS has changed their rules to say that you cannot require a seller to pay, to share commission for the buyer's agent. And we've also seen them take away the minimum. Like you can put 0 in there to the buyer agent if you want to. You're not required like you were in years past. Also, the MLSs are making seller paid compensation to the buyer's agent public information. And that's probably good because now everyone can see who's paying what. And like I said, these are going to have to come from different buckets or be part. So it's additional transparency. A lot of firms are not requiring Realtor Association membership. I'll tell you, despite NAR's recent troubles, I do believe that those are great organizations, and particularly at the local level, for a lot of reasons. If nothing else, they have wonderful forms for us to use that are very carefully created. I think it's also caused a distraction, and it's a real expense for the brokerage companies, which brokerage companies already have pretty thin margins. So immediately after the Spitzer verdict, you saw other verdicts being filed. One was against Compass, eXp, Redfin, and Douglas Elliman. I have a hard time saying that, Elliman. And now there are lots and lots of suits being filed against dozens of brokerages. So it's a distraction and it's expensive. So I don't know how that will ultimately impact the buyers and sellers or the agents, but it could have an impact. There's also just been a lot of uncertainty. I think this may discourage people from getting their real estate license who maybe just want it as a hobby, not necessarily a career. A dip in the market tends to separate the wheat from the chaff in real estate. And so I think that this may make the barriers to entry are fairly low to get into the business. But as we know, most agents don't really do much business. I think this may raise the bar a little bit. None of these things so far have been earth-shattering, but it just shows that we are adapting to what is, changes are coming. In the midterm, I think we're going to see changes to lending rules. I think we will see consolidation of MLSs, partly because these judgments against them are just going to make it so, they're just going to be so expensive that they're probably going to have to consolidate. I think we're going to see MLSs decoupling from from realtor associations, so that the MLS exists separately from the association. And most importantly, I think we're going to see the unbundling of agent services, particularly for buyers. Like I said before, it may not just be a 3% commission or 2.5 or whatever it is you get. It might be, I'm going to spend, cost $1,000 for me to spend a day with you and do CMAs on all these properties that we see, something like that. Mm-hmm. Or a certain amount of money to shepherd your transaction, contract to close. And in the long term, who knows? We've really just started a long process, and there are a lot of unknowns still out there. I think there will probably be some industry consolidation, meaning brokerages consolidating a little bit more. I think buyer agency will be compensated differently, like we just talked about, with unbundled services, retainers, things like that. I think it will increase the level of skill and professionalism that's required of agents. Or put another way, it will weed out a lot of the ones who aren't skilled or who are unprofessional. I have recently bought an electric car. Somebody rear-ended me and totaled my car. So I bought an electric car. And when I first got it, I was like, oh, this is completely different. It's like driving a computer. But really, it still takes me places. It still has tires. It still rolls on a street. It still has 4 doors. So the fuel's a little different. Like the way I power it is a little different. But kind of the more things change, the more they stay the same. So I kind of think of it that way. There will be changes, but I don't know that that the world will change completely.
Mm-hmm. And we were already seeing some of that separation from the people that got into the business, during mm-hmm. the pandemic, all of a sudden realizing that, sales didn't just fall in their lap. So we were already seeing that. So do you think that this is going to help kind of make that go faster? Because you made that point, and I was like, that is something that we've already been talking about for the past year after the market slowed down a little bit. So it sounds to me like there's multiple things going on that's really going to potentially change what the real estate profession looks like. Like you said, the professionalism, the work, actually having to get in and do things. Do you think that it's making it go faster by having these lawsuits?
Well, we're also seeing a little bit of a dip in the market. So there's just less out there. This happens every time when the market goes up, people get into the real estate business because we're all making a lot of money at that time. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, this is a sales job and it's very market driven. And when it goes down, the people who aren't making enough money to live on it's not worth it for them to stay in it. So we always see that a little bit. So to some degree, this is just the nature of our business. I do think, though, that in many cases right now, kind of the way you start is you get some leads somewhere from buyers and you go and you show buyers houses and you learn to be a real estate agent by doing that. And then as you build your sphere, you grow your listing business. I think that probably we're going to see buyers agents really have to come to the table from the get-go with a lot of good experience and knowledge. So I think the training that is required to be a successful agent might increase. And I'll be candid with you, I don't think that's bad. I think it's good. And also good, experienced, highly skilled, knowledgeable, ethical agents will be fine. We always have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Amazing insights. Thank you for sharing that. I heard you mention earlier about the impact to buyers, and you mentioned that it would primarily be on the less affluent. And my ultimate question is, what is the impact on lending? So I heard you say earlier that there'll be a impact on the less affluent, and that, of course, impacts the number of loans that the lenders will be writing. But what are some of the other impacts?
Sure, from lenders. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So first of all, the lenders are an important part of this conversation, particularly when we're talking about people who aren't wealthy, because they're just, most people just can't pay cash for a house. They're just too expensive now. Mm-hmm. And it's a great way. It makes sense to borrow money for that asset because, it's always been the best wealth builder that there is. So let's think about lenders. What do lenders want? They want good collateral and a smooth transaction. And a buyer's agent, a buyer who is represented, I believe strongly that they are much more likely to buy a house that is in good shape or that is, what they need, maybe is not going to be a money pit that they can't afford. And a buyer's agent definitely helps you have a smoother transaction. That's what lenders want. I don't think lenders are going to be motivated to get rid of buyer's agents. Now, let's talk about the nuts and bolts. There is already substantial conversation going on about revising loan guidelines. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac are the ones we think about the most. They, these quasi-governmental agents or companies, I guess, back these loans. They guarantee these loans like an insurance policy. And to do that, they have certain guidelines to say the collateral has to be this good and it has to be done this way in order to avoid fraud and to make sure the collateral is good. So that being said, right now they don't really contemplate that you would add a line item for commissions other than on the seller side. It doesn't usually happen. Sometimes it does. And that just kind of goes to the bottom line. But I think that we will specifically address because the issue that we're having, that I'm concerned that we may have, is that an appraisal currently sort of already reflects in the value, the commissions built into that. In the future, if we unbundle that, it won't be. So therefore, I think Fannie and Freddie will, and they're already talking about it, revise their guidelines to allow a buyer to add commissions up to a certain amount to their loan because it's a cost of buying the house. It is a closing cost. And that's the next thing. They may increase the amount of closing costs that they will allow the seller to pay on behalf of the buyer. So, for instance, if your seller's paying 6%, and no closing costs to the buyer. That's no different than the seller paying 3% commission and 3% closing costs to the buyer to cover their side of the commission. But there are restrictions on how much closing costs the seller can pay right now. So that might be increased a little bit so that some of that seller cost can be used to compensate the buyer's agent, which again, it's all the same money. It doesn't change the money. And I think that they may possibly reduce down payment requirements, knowing that buyers are going to have to use that cash at the table to pay their buyer's agent. I don't think that's super likely. I think we'll do it in one of the other ways. Then there will be tweaks to federal lending programs, like currently in the VA program, you can't use any VA money to pay your agent. Well, that can change. I think the impact will be minimal in general. It'll just be adjustments. I think the issue with lending will be the timing. Because, first of all, these are government processes that take a while to get through the checks and balances and bureaucracy. And candidly, Washington is in total gridlock right now. We can't count on Congress to get anything done. So how long will this take? I don't know. And we really don't even know where this is actually going yet. So I think the hard part might be in the middle, while we're trying to figure out where the loan guidelines are going. So.
Okay. And I know you have mentioned a couple times that this is a long process and we don't know what we don't know at this point. But any thoughts on timing for potential permanent changes?
Well, first of all, let's think how the court system works, especially when a big trial like this is happening. The next time in Sitzer, which has a verdict already, they've already gone through the trial and had the verdict and all the pretrial stuff, which took years. They don't even turn in the next set of motions until January the 8th. And then the plaintiffs have 26 till February 26th to respond to the defendants. And the defendants have until March 18th to respond. And then they have to resolve all of those motions about different things that have to be decided. Then after all of those are decided, there's a 30-day waiting period, and then the judgment can be executed. So it's going to be mid-2024 at best before we even actually know the outcome of Sitzer. And then it's going to be appealed, which is going to take years. So this is going to be a long process. I think a lot more cases will go to court, and they may generate conflicting results. They may have different results than Sitzer, and judges may rule differently on the law. That's going to result in more and more appeals. This likely will make it to the Supreme Court in one way or another, I anticipate, because the stakes are so high. In the meantime, I think some of the settlements that are happening now in the other cases, they may provide us a dirt path, let's put it that way, sort of some guidance as to where the industry's going. But it's the courts that are going to have to pave the road. So I think they may provide a dirt path until we have the road paved. But yeah, it's gonna shake out for quite a while.
Okay. And, you've talked a little bit about how it impacts the buyer and the buyer's agent. So I'm going to combine my next two questions together a little bit. So how does it impact the agent representing the buyer, and how can that agent, what can they do? What can they do now to help set themselves up and their business up for success as things are constantly changing and as we don't know what's going to happen. So regardless of those factors, what can they do now to ensure success in their business?
Okay, well, the number one thing is a couple of huge concepts here. Number one is to show your value. That is the most important thing you can do. And social media is a terrific tool for this because we've built these big audiences. We have an open platform and it's also a very personal relationship. And it's not about the value of a buyer's agent in general. It's about you and what you can do to help someone who wants to buy a house. And so I think leveraging social media is key to showing your value. Speak specifically to the people who want to buy a property. Show them what you do. Are you writing contracts? Are you getting an inspection done? Are you negotiating something? Information you're learning in a CE class, things like that are very relevant. I mean, here's the one thing I would say. This is no longer about you. This is about your value to the client. So let's make it, I mean, it needs to be personal, but let's keep it focused on what they need. And then the second thing is you need to accept the fact right now that you now do buyer presentations just like you do listing presentations. You walk in there with your documents and your script memorized and your competition summarized and your value proposition. And you need to know and be comfortable with negotiating the value and the cost of your services and commission. That's the number one thing that I hear agents say about not really talking about commission when they get their buyer brokerage agreement signed. They just sort of skim over it like it's just paperwork we have to do. You don't do that in a listing agreement. You know you have competition and you know you have to show them why they should list with you. Starting right now, this is what we do for buyer clients as well. So always use a brokerage agreement. And always discuss compensation because that's actually legally, that could put you in legal liability if you don't literally talk about and negotiate with your client about your compensation. Now, when I say negotiate, that may mean that your compensation could come in different ways. It doesn't mean you have to take less, but it may mean you get a retainer up front. And that retainer is reduced from your 3% commission at the end, or your 2.5%, or maybe it's not taken away from that. Maybe you're going to get a 2% commission and a retainer. Think about what you do and how much time it takes you and what you're paying for to be able to do that. So for instance, if you write great contracts and you use your Association of Realtors forms, what does it cost for you to be a member of that association, and how long does it take for you to write and negotiate a contract? Put a dollar value on that per hour and be willing to think about that in your pricing. To do a CMA, to find out what the values are like and what someone should offer on a property, that's worth a lot. You may keep them from overpaying, or at least you've given them better negotiation information. All of that has value, and be ready to talk about it. Here's the thing. I don't understand why amazing agents freeze up on buyer brokerage agreements. You negotiate listings and you justify your value for a listing presentation, and you negotiate great on behalf of your clients when you're negotiating a contract. So it's the same thing. You do it all day, every day. Just do it for buyers. You offer a lot of value there. In some ways, this has less risk to the agent because it's predictable income. If I go out with these buyers, I'm going to make $1,000, whether they buy anything or not. Here's the retainer. I'm already making, $10,000 or 1% of their budget before we even get to a contract. That could be good. But these are all the things you already do. It's the essence of our job. So you can do it.
I feel like there needs to be a lot of buyer education though as well. I mean, it's almost like the interest rates. Compared to a couple years ago, they're extremely high. Compared to historically, they are not that high. But in everyone's head, we cannot buy a house right now because it is that much higher than it was a couple years ago. I feel like a lot of people will have the same thing of, why am I going to pay $1,000 to have an agent drive me around and show me houses when it used to be a different way? And it kind of goes back to what you were talking about with your car. It's like, it serves the same purpose. It just looks slightly different. But I do think that there's a lot of buyer education that will need to happen if we move in that direction.
Yes, I agree. And again, I'm going to say lean on social media for this, but be very deliberate and be very thoughtful about social media, because, the agents who are like, I sold this house in 2 days. Well, does that show your value? I mean, don't make it look so easy. I mean, what did you do to sell that house? Did you stage it? Did you have it painted? Did you do an open house? I mean, be sure that you're demonstrating what your work actually is. And social media is such a good platform for that. And I know tons of people who have incredibly good social media. I learned something yesterday from one of my agents, Instagram reel, and I was like, wow, that's awesome. I mean, you can really teach a lot and come across as an expert. Some people write their own wills, and sadly they don't know until they're dead that it didn't work. As a lawyer, I used to see that a lot. Would you search your own title? I mean, really? There's anything in the world you can try to DIY it. This is your biggest investment and your biggest debt, and you wake up in it every day and you go to bed in it every day, and your family lives in it. Do you want this to be a DIY project? I feel like that's a message that we can let people see and hear. It just needs to be really thoughtful.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we love that you are talking about social media, and we 100% agree with you on everything that you are saying, especially around, I just want to hit home that point around the providing value in your content, because that is something that we try to educate people constantly on. It's, I just sold this house in 2 days. Okay, great. Well, why? It's because you have a huge network of agents that you have worked with and have a good, reputation with, and you were able to, work that. So there's so many different pieces that go into that besides just the one, like, sold this house in 2 days. To your point, it doesn't look like you had to do anything, but there was probably, weeks of pre-work before the house went live that the agent had to do.
So I call this rom-com social media. This is where, like, you're talking about the result, and the tension in the beginning and the result. But in every romantic comedy, like, there's that little montage with the really skitty music where they're on the ladder painting, and somebody drops a cup of coffee or whatever, and it's all really fun. And in real life, that's where the actual work was. I mean, these people painted their entire house and totally redecorated it, and whatever it was they did during that little thing, or completely made herself over by going to the gym every day for 2 years. And we roll past that and spend 30 seconds or a minute on it in this 2-hour movie. Sometimes I think that's what real estate agents are doing. When you make your job look easy breathe, I mean, you don't want to complain about it. If you're good at your job, that's great, and you love it, show that. But, like, when you make it look like any idiot could do this, there's nothing to it. All you're doing is increasing the number of people who join our industry and don't know anything about what's really involved. It's okay. You can show what you're doing during that time, all the little nitty gritty. When people see what we really do, a lot of them will really appreciate value and realize that that's more than they want to take on with their own family and full-time job. It's a lot of work.
I think it was a broke agent or something on social media that said, I want flexibility and to work less hours and to make my own schedule, so I'm going to become a real estate agent. And then it was like laughing, because it is true. That is the persona that's out there is like, you can create your own schedule and not work as many hours. But in reality, I mean, we all know, we see it day in and day out. Real estate agents work more hours than probably most of us. Trying to.
I don't think all the TV shows about real estate agents have done us any favors either, because it's just like, I mean, would you really want to marry a housewife like a real housewife? Do you really want a real estate agent like this?
Exactly. Well, those are all amazing insights, Leslie. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We've got a couple questions coming in the chat right now while we're waiting on those. Leslie, can you please chat for just a minute and share what SIDE is all about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know of anything really like it, which is why I was drawn to it. So SIDE is a white label brokerage. The idea here is that really successful, great agents they don't get their business from their company. Once you're at that level, you have your business because of your reputation and your connections. But going out on your own and starting your own brokerage or independent brokerage is expensive and it's risky. It takes a lot of time away from what you're actually good at doing. So we handle the compliance pieces. We provide a great technology stack and a bunch of marketing tools, so that our partners can focus on what they do best and sell houses, marketing, networking, building a team, and coaching. I mean, if you're out there selling $50 million worth of houses every year, you don't want to sit around and have to review contracts all night long. I mean, you want a lawyer geek like me to do that for you. So the best part of it is that you get to own your own company and have your own brand and your own culture and do it the way you want to do it. And it's an asset that you can sell. It's your brand. So we've had some successes with this already. It's literally a business you can sell. That's not something you can do when you're working under another brokerage. So it's kind of cool.
Awesome. And Michaela just put a link to side.com in the chat. So go ahead and grab that. And if there's an agent in the audience that's interested in learning more about becoming a SIDE partner and having a boutique brokerage and their own brand, how do they reach out to you for a discovery call?
Sure. First of all, just go to side.com and it has a lot of information there. It's easy to get in touch through that.
So we have one question here from Natalie. It says, as agents, we pay fees to both NAR and MLS. In MLS, we have to pay dues not only for access, we also pay a % of the sales as a listing fee. How do you see the fees changing based on the lawsuit?
I don't know. I think that seeing consolidation, which we're already starting to see, I know there's been a big push starting years ago for the MLSs to align their different fields, because it's so hard for them to have your IDX feeds that feed into other websites like your web page or whatever, when there's no consistency. I don't know whether I think it was technology driving that more, but now that there is more of a uniform set of fields in the MLS, I think it'll be easier to consolidate and probably easier to automate. I also believe that, every little MLS, every tiny little one county MLS has to have a staff and they have to pay for the technology. So my hope would be that if we see that consolidation, and the move towards some consistency might also lead to automation, that should maybe reduce prices a little bit on the MLS side. As far as the association dues, I mean, that's also a little bit hard to say because they vary so much. I mean, NAR is a standard, but then as you get into the different states and then locals, it's going to be all about value. It's the same as what we've been talking about all hour.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Christy, I think you had another question from the audience.
Yep. So we talked about the impact for agents and for buyers agents and sellers agents. What about any insights on brokerage impacts? Leslie, I know you mentioned that you might see some consolidation. I also know January tends to be a time where there's lots of agents moving around to different brokerages. Do you have any insights into what the impact of the brokerages may be?
Well, I mean, the thing that stands out in my mind the most is we are gasping over a possible $5.5 billion judgment from Sitzer, but Gibson was over $200 million alleged. And so, I mean, already real estate brokerages operated on a very slim margin. So, it could have a really big impact just financially. It could bankrupt some companies. I hate to say it. That being said, the really strong companies who have highly qualified agents and are doing well, will continue to thrive. There's no question about that because our services, I mean, look, we offer a basic vital service to people, which is housing. You need food and housing. Food and shelter are two of the most basic things that we need. So our industry will not go away. But yes, there could be a big financial impact. Now, let me back down from that a little bit. I don't think these judgments are going to come out as high as some of these juries are predicting. And I think there will be some things overturned on appeal because I don't think there's a super sophisticated understanding of some of the way that our industry works. And so that being said, I'm not Chicken Little here. I don't think it's going to destroy our industry by any means. I do think it may make it very difficult for small to medium size, indies, or local to do really well because they're going to be sued too. I mean, like, everybody is going to be sued. It's going to be like Oprah giving out cars, like you get a lawsuit, you get a lawsuit, everybody. Most of them will go nowhere, but we're going to have to deal with it for a little while until we get some direction. That being said, I think it may impact the smaller and locals and that kind of thing, which is honestly not to advertise, but that's kind of why I like our model because we're a hybrid. We're a big company that's very well, funded and strong, but we also let people do sort of an indie model. I don't think that I don't know. It could impact the smaller ones a little bit who don't have something backing them.
Awesome. Well, Leslie, this was absolutely amazing, incredible. What a great conversation.
Thank you.
I know the audience got tremendous value out of the last hour. I know that we did. And we can't thank you enough. Obviously, your insights were spot on. I'm so glad that you were able to bring the legal perspective as an attorney. And you certainly gave the audience a lot of tangible ideas that they can ponder and put into action. We would love to have you back in the spring for another update. This important issue if you're available. Before we wrap, I wanted to put our website in the chat real quick for the audience as well. It's stayinflowmarketing.com. We are a do-it-for-you social media agency, and we help you level up your social media so you can elevate your personal brand, you can grow your network, generate leads, and ultimately grow your business. So thank you, Michaela, for getting that link in there. We're also going to put a link in there at our website for anybody that wants to book a discovery call. We would love to chat with you, see where you're at, and see how we can help you and add value to your business.
And I want to thank you for I want to thank you for having me here. I'm a huge fan. And I have seen Kara and Christy work for a long time. We go way back, and I have never ceased to be amazed at the amazing things they do from a marketing and organization it can't be beat. And so it's a privilege to be with you. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, it's a privilege to have you. So thank you so much.
All right.
Christy, any parting words before we wrap?
Yep, just thank you, Leslie. It is always amazing to hear your insights. You teach us so much all the time, pretty much every time we talk to you. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with our audience.
And if you like my social media, it's Kara and Christy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that testimonial. All right. I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your week. Thanks for joining us.